Hey everyone, What If Fan here, bringing you another exciting part of What If a Venerated Soul Reincarnated in Danmachi world. You can find the fanfic title and the original author's name on my Patreon page. Make sure to check it out and show them some love. If you enjoy the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Also check out my Patreon channel for early releases of all the series, where you can find all the series released one day ahead of YouTube. Alright, let's jump into it. Chapter 111, The Astrea Familia's Expedition. Hearing Elisa's declaration, the crowd erupted into cheers, their excitement feeding off the sheer intensity of her presence. As expected of a beautiful and perfect girl like me. Only someone with charisma overflowing from every pore can make the people go wild like this. Elise puffed her chest out, again. Her smug grin practically carved onto her face. Her bright red hair swayed as she drank in the attention like air. As her gaze swept through the gathered citizens, something caught her eye. A familiar glint. Then another. The Sword Princess? That shining golden hair made Ace Wallenstein stand out effortlessly, even among a sea of bodies. In Elisa's mind, Ace was one of the extremely few women in Orario who could match her in sheer beauty and natural charm. Naturally, Elise refused to admit she might even lose that competition. But her interest in the blonde lasted barely a heartbeat before it shifted, inevitably, to the figure walking beside her. Judas. The moment she saw the black-haired boy, Elisa's green eyes brightened, enough to make her expression turn even more vivid. As Judas and Ace pushed their way through the crowd, Elise didn't hesitate. She stepped forward with the confidence of someone who believed the spotlight belonged to her by default. Judas, Ace. What's up? Elise greeted them with her usual wide, radiant smile, one hand on her hip as if she were greeting two actors arriving late to her stage. Ace blinked once in greeting, her expression calm but faintly softening. Elise, she said with a small nod before taking another bite on the Jayagamarican in her hands. Morning, Captain. Judas offered a polite wave. Oh ho? Captain, huh? You're sounding awfully formal today, Judas. Did I suddenly become scary enough to demand respect? Elise grinned, leaning forward just a little. You were always scary. Judas blinked, his face expressionless. Ace nodded in quiet agreement. Hey! Elise puffed her cheeks indignantly, hands on her hips again. What is with that synchronized bullying? I'll have you know I'm extremely lovable. The crowd adores me. You too should learn a thing or two. But as she bragged, her eyes flicked toward the people behind her. Astrea Familia members gathering supplies, checking gear, and tightening straps. Her smile softened into something warmer, still bright, but with a shade of sincerity. We're heading out after this big expedition. Everyone's hyped. Elise said, straightening up. I know. People are expecting a lot from your group. Judas nodded, his gaze sweeping through the crowd around them. Of course they are, she declared proudly. We're the Astrea Familia, Justice Incarnate. She flexed dramatically, striking a pose full of confidence. Before Elise could retaliate, a calm voice called out from behind her. Are those Loki's kids? Judas and Ace? The redhead turned, spotting Kagaya and Lyra walking toward them with their usual confident, unhurried steps. And beside them, like a calm breeze in human form, was Astrea. Her presence alone seemed to soften the atmosphere. The goddess of justice wore a serene smile, warm enough to ease nerves yet dignified enough to command respect. Even in a bustling plaza full of chatter and movement, Astrea somehow made the world feel a little brighter. Goddess Astrea. Judas bowed his head slightly in greeting, respectful but not stiff. Ace mirrored him, her posture composed and steady. Oh, the fact you two came. Are you both here to see us off? Kagaya stepped forward, folding her arms with her typical mix of elegance and bluntness. Well, kind of. Judas replied with a shrug. He wasn't about to explain that he and Ace had only run into all of them by pure accident while heading back home. Tisk, you've gotten a bit more cheeky compared to when we first met. Kaguya clicked her tongue, though the amused smirk on her face betrayed her real mood. Yeah, back then you were more of that serious-looking edgelord type. All broody and mysterious. I wonder what happened to that guy. Lyra chimed in, tapping her chin thoughtfully. Right. I remember, 5 years ago, after you saved us from the Juggernaut, you just flew off into the sunset, leaving only your name behind. Super dramatic. Super cool. Very hidden master walking the path of shadows. Yup. Elise immediately joined in, sliding in beside Lyra as if tagging into a wrestling match. Judas did something like that? Ace blinked, stunned for a moment as Elise's words processed in her mind. Slowly, almost dangerously, her imagination began to take over. In her head, Judas was no longer the calm, slightly awkward boy standing beside her. No. He was draped in a pitch-black cloak, hood pulled low over his face so only the faint glow of his purple eyes could be seen, like twin amethysts floating in the dark. His presence radiated an ominous, otherworldly aura, the kind that made even veteran adventurers question their life choices. Wind howled behind him, despite there being none, his cloak billowing dramatically because in Ace's imagination, physics were optional. He raised a hand slowly, ominously, and in a low, deep, impossibly cool voice, he declared, I am atomic. The imaginary Judas unleashed a blinding flash of power, the ground cracking beneath his feet as if the world itself feared him. Amazing. She whispered under her breath, completely lost in her own thoughts. Ugh, even Ace got caught up in it. Judas groaned, lifting a hand in mock surrender. Okay, calm down. That was back when I barely knew you guys. Their laughter followed like a small gust of wind, warm, genuine, and loud enough to turn a couple of heads in the city square. It was moments like this that made it clear just how much the bond between them had grown. What started as a temporary mission had slowly shifted into real camaraderie, with Judas naturally opening up to the women of justice more than he ever expected. Oh my, it seems you guys have gotten along really well. Astria's smile deepened just a fraction, subtle, but unmistakably pleased as she watched their interaction. Excuse me, goddess. Captain, Miss Kaguya, Miss Lyra. We are ready to depart. One of the Astria Familia members jogged up to them, slightly breathless but wearing the disciplined posture of someone eager to begin. All right. Looks like that's our cue. We're heading out, see you later, Lady Astria, Judas, Ace. Elise rolled her shoulders once, the red hair on her back swaying as she nodded. We'll make sure everyone comes back safe and sound. Kaguya added firmly, her usual cool expression softening just a touch with resolve. And who knows? Lyra chimed in with a cheeky grin, tapping her cheek. Maybe I'll finally hit level 5 on this expedition. Would be nice to rub it in Lion's face for once. Astria giggled softly, her gentle voice carrying a warmth that wrapped around them like a blessing. Everyone, please be safe. Yes, goddess, her children replied as one. After one last round of small waves and smiles, each one lingering just a moment longer than necessary, they turned and began making their way toward the dungeon's entrance. The crowd parted for them almost instinctively, murmurs of admiration following in their wake. Judas and Ace raised their hands in farewell. Good luck on your expedition. Judas called out. Ace nodded, her expression calm but eyes quietly hopeful as their silhouettes slowly disappeared down the stone steps leading underground. When the last faint glimmer of their armor vanished from sight, the two turned back to Astria. We'll be off as well, Lady Astria. Judas said politely. Astria looked at the pair, her smile soft and radiant. Take care, both of you. She replied, her voice carrying that same serene warmth. Chapter 112, Expectant Gazes. Tonight, we will host a feast. Don't be late. Loki shouted excitedly. Today, the Twilight Manor was buzzing with energy, members of the Loki Familia hurrying about, carrying crates, sorting gear, and shouting instructions across the courtyard. It was a stark contrast to the quiet, almost serene atmosphere Judas was used to when they were away. The manor felt alive,
pulsing with movement. Ha! Another feast?
One of the younger members blinked in confusion, a sack of monster stones slung over his shoulder.
Ha! Last night was a banquet to celebrate our newest recruit. This time, it's to celebrate everyone for coming back alive from the expedition. Loki said with her trademark toothy grin.
She's just doing whatever she wants, someone muttered.
It's fine.
Who would say no to another celebration? Another laughed as they heaved a crate onto a cart.
Hey, I heard the Astrea Familia is about to go on an expedition. At this time?
They must have already gone down by now. More murmurs spread through the courtyard as members came and went, their arms full of loot bags, rare drop items, and heaps of monster stones. The clatter of metal and the rustling of sacks filled the air. It was always like this for the Loki Familia the day after returning from the dungeon, noisy, chaotic, and incredibly productive.
Every member had a job to do.
Loot needed to be sorted, recorded, and sent off to the guild. Because the Familia brought back such an absurd amount of goods every expedition, it required nearly everyone to help process the haul. And most of the money earned would be reinvested right back into their next dungeon dive. Equipment maintenance, repairing damaged armor, replacing broken blades, replenishing potions and magic swords. Considering the sheer number of members, the expenses were monstrous.
One expedition could burn through more resources than an entire small familia owned.
Yet this flow, earn, repair, prepare, dive, was precisely what kept Loki Familia strong. And today, Judas found himself watching it all unfold, absorbing the rhythm of a familia that lived and breathed the dungeon.
Everyone is really busy today.
Judas blinked as he and Ace stepped through the gate, taking in the flurry of activity around them.
Amen. Everyone is working hard.
Ace said softly, her attention only half on the chaos around them as she took the last bite of her wrapped potato. She brushed the crumbs from her fingertips with her usual quiet composure.
Ace. Judas. Where have you guys been? We were just about to head to the guild.
Tiona's energetic voice cut through the noise like a burst of sunlight. She came sprinting toward them at full speed, waving her arm overhead with a grin wide enough to split her face. Behind her, the rest of the executives followed at a steadier pace. Finn at the front giving quick instructions, Riveria glancing over ledgers and notes, and Gareth walking beside a cart stacked with monster drops.
Several more carts trailed behind them, wheels creaking under the weight. Tiona, slow down.
Riveria said without looking up from her notes, though the slight twitch of her eyebrow showed she already expected the Amazon's usual burst of energy.
We're not late, are we? Judas asked as Tiona skidded to a stop in front of them. Well, not yet.
Tiona said as she walked past, arms crossed, giving them both a side-eye that hovered somewhere between teasing and scolding.
Since you guys are here, we can head out together. Tiona added with a bright smile. When Riveria told me that you brought Ace with you, I had a hard time believing it. Gareth said as he stepped forward. So? How was it? The training with silence, I mean.
Riveria added as she approached. From Judas' recollection, it seems like Althea is still the same as ever. The green-haired high elf had quite a bit of history with the silver-haired woman. 15 years ago, it had been Althea who delivered the final blow to the Leviathan, one of the three great monsters, using her overwhelming magic. Back then, the three pillars of the Loki Familia, Riveria, Finn, and Gareth, were nothing more than supporters during that battle. It was also the first time Riveria had witnessed the true might of the Zeus and Hera Familius. Ever since that day, she had been determined to surpass the woman who was called the Monster of Talent. Of course, during the reign of Zeus and Hera, Ororio had been a very different place. Members of the Zeus and Hera Familius regularly picked fights in the streets, overwhelming other factions and making them taste defeat again and again. Riveria, who was active during that era, had often found herself on the receiving end of Althea's fists. She could still remember, with painful clarity, the shape of Althea's knuckles as that woman calmly chanted gospel before knocking her out cold. Ace and Judas, they must have dealt with something similar, she thought. A harsh baptism born from relentless combat. Because of that era, the current leading generation, Otter, Finn, and several others, possessed a terrifyingly sharp sense for battle against other adventurers. It was something Ace and the rest of her generation lacked. Which was why Riveria wasn't opposed to letting Ace join Judas in training under Althea. The Amazon sisters, and even Bet, who was leaning against a nearby tree, twitched their ears at the mention of Althea. They had heard about Judas' circumstances during yesterday's meeting. Judas and Ace exchanged a brief glance. In the end, Ace answered. It was hard. But it was fun, she said softly as she clenched her fist. Even after being fully healed by Judas' magic, Ace vividly remembered the pain from Althea's merciless punches. I want to do it again. Althea was stronger, faster, and tougher than anyone she had ever fought. Painful as it had been, if that experience allowed her to grow, Ace would take that opportunity again without hesitation. Seeing her earnest expression, Riveria let out a quiet sigh. Well, it's better than her wandering around and risking her life in the dungeon, she thought as she looked toward the black-haired boy beside Ace. Judas, remember our arrangement this afternoon? Riveria reminded him, her tone stern, but with the faintest trace of excitement beneath it. I know. Judas nodded. No sooner had he said that. Wait, did I hear that right? You brought Ace to your training session with that strong adventurer from the Hera Familia? Tiona gasped, eyes widening as she immediately grabbed Judas' arm and pressed it tightly against her chest, or at least the place where something should have been. Can I come with you? She asked, looking up at him with an exaggerated pair of puppy dog eyes, her grip tightening as if afraid he might slip away the moment she blinked. Ahem, maybe I should tag along. I don't want my little sister getting hurt. Tioni muttered, glancing away stiffly. Even Bet was edging closer, eyes gleaming with eagerness, though he couldn't bring himself to actually say anything. Judas stared at the three of them, all practically burning holes into him with their expectant gazes. Chapter 113, Giensec's Pharmacy. What the hell? Judas felt his eye twitch as the situation spiraled completely out of his control. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he slowly turned his head toward Finn, only to see the Paolum captain casually shrug, as if silently saying, "You deal with it." Judas clicked his tongue internally before shifting his gaze to the Amazon glued to his side. Tiona was still hugging his arm with all the enthusiasm of a child clinging to their favorite toy. Her bright grin and puppy-like eyes practically radiating sparkles. Honestly, the look alone was enough to kill most people's resistance. But what really got him was the strength behind that grip. Cute face or not, the pressure she was putting on his arm was starting to hurt. Judas tried to quietly tug himself free, once, twice, but her hold didn't budge in the slightest. She's too damn strong. Eventually, he gave up and looked to his other side. Tioni was trying to act composed, arms crossed, eyes half averted, but the slight lean in his direction betrayed her interest. Meanwhile, a short distance away, Bet pretended to not care, ears perked, tail stiff, eyes glaring but undeniably eager. Subtle? Not in the slightest. Judas exhaled. I'll have to ask Althea first. Whether she lets you join or not is completely up to her. As soon as he said that, Tiona's face lit up with pure joy. Tioni gave a small, satisfied nod. And Bet clicked his tongue before turning away, though his tail still betrayed that spark of excitement. Gareth, watching all this unfold, furrowed his brows. Are we sure we should be allowing this to happen? If I remember correctly, that witch Althea isn't exactly gentle. They might come back with broken bones every time. He stroked his beard thoughtfully, turning to Finn. Finn only smiled lightly before answering. It's fine. Didn't we also go through that kind of harsh baptism? Besides. His gaze drifted to Judas. With his healing magic, they'll survive. Probably. If you say so. Gareth let out a low breath, shoulders rising and falling as if bracing himself for memories he'd rather forget. Good luck, lad. You'll need it more than any of us. He gave Judas a sympathetic pat on the shoulder, heavy enough to almost make him stumble.
It was then Raoul jogged toward them with a salute, slightly out of breath. "Captain, we are ready to depart,"
Raoul said respectfully.
"Let's go."
Finn nodded as he watched Anna Kitty finish tightening one of the ropes securing a cart, giving it a firm tug before joining the others. As the group began moving toward the main street, Judas naturally fell into step beside them, the rumbling of wheels filling the air. It didn't take long for him to notice the shift in the atmosphere. People on the streets immediately stepped aside, creating a path for them without anyone needing to say a word. Some watched with wide eyes, others whispered excitedly, while a few simply stood frozen, caught between awe and disbelief.
"Look!
It's the Loki Familia, they already came back from their expedition.
The braver Findame is right there."
Amazing, so many first-class adventurers gathered together.
Judas blinked at the reactions.
Even though he had already gotten used to his own growing reputation, seeing the entire Loki Familia parade through the streets with carts filled to the brim was a different kind of spectacle. With the sheer number of first-class adventurers walking in formation, and the mountain of loot being dragged behind them, of course they drew attention like moths to a flame.
Naturally, no one with half a brain would ever consider a robbery. Even the city's most hardened criminals wouldn't dare to breathe in their direction, much less cause trouble. So with quiet admiration, awestruck stares, and an open path before them, the Loki Familia made their way confidently toward the guild.
They stopped right in front of the guild's main building as Finn turned to the group, his presence instantly commanding attention.
"All right.
Riveria, Gareth, and I will handle the exchange of magic stones for Valis.
Everyone else, follow the plan and head to your assigned duties."
Finn's gaze swept across the gathered adventurers.
"And remember,
don't go pocketing any of the money for yourselves."
"Isn't that right, Raoul?"
Finn added with a knowing smirk, eyes locking onto Raoul in particular.
"See, Captain. That was only one time, and I already returned it." Raoul stammered, beads of sweat rolling down his face. "Ha ha."
Finn laughed it off before shifting his attention to Judas.
"Oh, right. I forgot to assign you to a group."
"Well, you don't have any tasks for now, just observe how everyone handles their negotiations.
Take it as a learning experience." Judas nodded silently. "Then let's head in."
Finn strode toward the doors, Riveria and Gareth right behind him, and the entire procession broke apart into smaller teams, each group peeling off toward their designated partners and shops.
Left on his own, Judas was just deciding which group to join when. "Judas, come here. You can join us."
Tiona's energetic voice shot through the air as she grabbed his arm and immediately dragged him across the street. Ahead, Ace, Lafia, and Tione were already waiting.
Tiona pulled him straight toward them, and Judas naturally blended into their formation without anyone questioning it. Well, except for a certain amber-haired elf. Lafia, was it?
He couldn't help noticing her glancing at him every now and then.
Out of everyone here, Lafia was the one he knew the least.
But since Ace, Tiona, and Tione accepted his presence without hesitation, there wasn't much she could say about it. Judas let the thought go as Tione's voice snapped his attention forward.
"All right, we're here."
The group came to a stop in front of a familiar storefront.
Judas looked up at the sign. Diensek's Pharmacy.
The very place he usually bought his potions before delving into the dungeon. Hee, let's squeeze as much money as we can out of these suckers.
Tione said with a predatory grin, eyes practically sparkling with dollar signs. Miss Tione, that's not a very nice thing to say." Lafia murmured nervously, though she still followed them inside. It wasn't only the guild that bought drop items.
Business-type familias also conducted exchanges, often at better rates, provided the adventurer could negotiate well enough. As Judas and the others stepped inside, they were greeted by a silver-haired woman behind the counter.
"Welcome, members of the Loki Familia," Ermid Tizenair said gently, dressed in her usual healer's attire. Chapter 114, Negotiating for a Good Deal. "Long time no see, Ermid." Tiona greeted her with a bright smile and an energetic wave. I assume your presence here means the mission has been completed, correct?
Ermid's calm voice carried across the shop as her gaze swept over the group, pausing briefly on Judas. She gave him a polite nod, which Judas returned in kind. Having been both a frequent customer and one of her former patients, they shared a quiet, mutual familiarity.
That's right. We got the goods right here,
Tioni said confidently, raising a jar filled with clear water. Ermid's eyes narrowed slightly as she inspected the item from a distance, her expression as composed as ever.
Let's discuss it over the counter,
she said, motioning them forward. Tioni handed the jar to her, and Ermid examined it up close.
Cadmus spring water, and the quantity meets the requested amount, she murmured, nodding in approval. The Dian sect Familia is extremely thankful to the Loki Familia for completing this request.
She straightened her posture slightly.
Here is the promised reward. Please accept it.
With that, Ermid lifted several crates filled with potion bottles and placed them neatly on the counter.
Tiona's eyes sparkled immediately. Oh! Whoa! This many?
I swear this alone looks like enough to buy a whole mansion, she exclaimed, hefting one crate with both hands. Elixirs of this quality, produced by the Dian sect Familia, are valued at around 50,000 valis each,
Lafia added, gently running her fingers along the sleek surface of a bottle. MN. Ace nodded quietly. These are even higher quality than the ones I usually buy,
Judas noted as he examined the crates, impressed. Just then, Tioni pulled something out of her bag. Ermid, actually, while we were deep in the dungeon completing the mission, we happened to acquire a rare drop item. She unfurled a rolled piece of fabric.
If you can give us a decent price, we're willing to sell.
Ermid took the item, her brows lifting slightly as she felt the material.
Soft.
The fabric shimmered faintly as she unrolled it, smooth and lustrous. That's Cadmus skin, Tioni said proudly, leaning in.
We were lucky to find it. It's a very rare item that's very hard to get,
Tioni continued, deliberately emphasizing every key word like she was negotiating for her life. Ermid examined it carefully.
It appears to be genuine. This is top-class crafting material. We can offer 7 mil. 15 million valis. Tioni interrupted immediately.
Ace, Lafia, and even Tiona whipped their heads toward her, eyes wide.
Judas' eyebrows shot up. 15 million, that's about what I earn from 3 dungeon dives on the lower floors, and that's if I get lucky. What followed was a surprisingly fierce back and forth. Tioni argued with a big smile.
Ermid countered with a serene expression that never cracked.
Tiona occasionally threw in a supportive yeah. Lafia stressed quietly in the corner. Ace blinked. Judas merely watched everything unfold.
I didn't know Tioni had this kind of game. He genuinely learned something new about her. Finally, after what felt like a minute of verbal swordplay.
Sigh. Ermid let out a breath. 12 million. That is the highest price I am willing to offer. Tioni's grin widened as she shook Ermid's hand. Thank you, Ermid. I knew we'd come to an understanding.
As several hefty bags of valis were placed on the counter, not a trace of shame crossed Tioni's face. If anything, she looked proud, absolutely glowing with victory. Sometimes, to negotiate a great price, you needed a thick skin.
And Tioni's was practically legendary.
Being the only man in the group, Judas naturally ended up carrying most of the stuff they had just obtained.
Telekinesis.
With a simple thought, several crates filled with potions and a few heavy sacks of valis lifted off the ground and floated neatly behind him in a small orbit. Ace, Tiona, Lafia, and Tioni watched the scene unfold, and all 4 reacted in their own way. What a useful magic!
Tiona breathed out, eyes sparkling. More magic. And it's also a no-chance spell. Lafia muttered in disbelief, torn between awe and professional jealousy. Her ears twitched in irritation, but even she couldn't hide how impressed she was.
Hey! Be careful not to drop that crate. Tione warned sharply, her gaze locked on the crate filled with expensive potions, as if staring hard enough would keep them from falling. Ace, in contrast, simply stared with quiet fascination, golden eyes fixed on the drifting items like she was trying to understand how it worked.
Anyway, let's hurry back home and put the money away.
Holding this much cash in the middle of the street feels a bit scary, Tione said as she strode forward.
Ah.
Tione, I have to head to the Goibnia Familia to have my weapon repaired,
Ace said quietly. Oh right. I'm going too. My Urga got destroyed during the expedition,
Tiona added, lifting her empty hands with an exaggerated sigh.
Hearing those words, Judas blinked, a thoughtful look crossing his face.
Right, they did mention encountering a new monster species during the expedition. During the meeting, the Loki Familia executives hadn't only discussed how to handle the situation with the Freya Familia, they had also gone over what had transpired deep within the dungeon.
Giant, caterpillar-like monsters that could spew acid, if I remember correctly? It wasn't ordinary acid either.
The substance was potent enough to corrode weapons and armor entirely, eating through steel as though it were nothing more than butter.
That was precisely why Finn had advised everyone to bring equipment with the Durandal attribute on their next expedition.
Since their attempt to reach the 59th floor had ended in failure, it was only a matter of time before they tried again, this time, far better prepared.
The deep floors of the dungeon. I wonder what they're like. Judas couldn't help but feel a spark of curiosity. All right then, Tione nodded. Me, Judas, and Lafia will head back first. With that, Ace and Tiona peeled away in the opposite direction. See you later, Ace. Tiona. Lafia waved enthusiastically, and Judas offered a casual nod as the two vanished into the crowd. Chapter 115, Riveria's Call. The walk back to Twilight Manor was uneventful. After half an hour of walking, the familiar gates came into view, and when they stepped inside, the manor was noticeably quieter than when they had left. Only a handful of guards and lower-ranked members milled about. It seems like we're one of the first groups to make it back,
Tione observed, hands on her hips as she surveyed the hall. Then she turned to Judas.
All right, hand over the money. I'll deliver everything to the captain's office. Judas gave a simple nod.
With a flick of his fingers, the floating crates and heavy sacks drifted toward her, settling neatly into her arms.
If you need me, Judas said, already turning toward the corridor.
I'll be in the training grounds. His footsteps echoed softly as he walked away, leaving Tione and Lafia behind in the quiet hall. Now sitting in the training area, freshly repaired after the damage from his fight with Ace, Judas took a moment to assess the space around him as a magic circle slowly lit up beneath his feet.
The amount of mana it's gathered looks decent enough,
he muttered under his breath before closing his eyes and shifting into a meditative pose.
Time passed quietly.
Before long, members of the Loki Familia began returning one after another, each carrying heavy sacks of coins in their arms. Judging from their satisfied expressions, most of them had managed to negotiate a good deal.
Ha! What's that newcomer doing?
Several members paused, noticing Judas sitting in the middle of the training grounds, unmoving.
Hey, do you guys feel something weird around him? What is that?
A few elves and mages narrowed their eyes, sensing the faint swirl of an unfamiliar energy gathering around his body.
Is that some kind of training?
From her room, Lafia watched through the window with a curious look in her eyes as her gaze landed on the black-haired boy. People were curious, but no one interrupted him out of respect.
Hours later, Judas' eyes finally opened.
The magic circle pulsed once before fading, scattering like dust on the wind.
He exhaled deeply, a faint shimmer of magic leaking out with his breath.
By now, almost everyone had returned. The base was lively again, voices, footsteps, laughter, and the noise of coins being counted echoed through the halls. That was when he heard a set of footsteps approaching.
I hope I'm not disturbing.
A calm, gentle voice reached him.
Judas turned, spotting an orange-haired elf standing at the entrance of the training grounds.
She carried herself with a mature air. Soft-spoken but steady, like a reliable older sister.
Alicia Forest Light. Level 4 Mage. Second string member of the Loki Familia.
It's fine, Judas replied as he stood up, brushing dust from his pants.
I was about done anyway.
Alicia gave him a warm, faintly amused smile. Unlike most elves who were petite, Alicia possesses a well-endowed and curvaceous body that rivals Tioni's, which made other people wonder if she is really an elf. Good timing, Alicia continued.
Miss Riveria asked me to fetch you. She wants you in the library.
Oh, right.
I almost forgot about that. Judas scratched his cheek. Let's go, then. It's best not to keep Lady Riveria waiting,
Alicia said as she turned, her long hair swaying behind her. Judas fell into step beside her, leaving the training grounds. They walked through the quiet corridor that connected the courtyard to the manor's interior. Lantern light flickered along the walls, casting warm glows over polished wooden floors. Alicia glanced sideways at him. You've only been with us for a short time, yet everyone keeps talking about you non-stop. Well, I guess that's natural when someone of your caliber joins the Familia out of nowhere, she said lightly as she continued walking.
Judas raised a brow. In a good way or a bad way?
A soft chuckle escaped her lips.
Mostly good. Riveria is curious about your magic.
Lafia.
Well, she's intimidated.
And the others, either they respect you for your strength or they just don't know what to make of you yet.
I see, Judas muttered.
Alicia's smile widened a little.
Don't worry.
The Loki Familia has plenty of eccentric members.
You fit right in.
They turned down another hallway, passing a few adventurers who greeted Alicia with nods before glancing curiously at Judas, whispering among themselves once they thought he was out of earshot.
Judas ignored it.
When they reached the familiar ornate double doors leading to the library, Alicia slowed to a stop. She lifted her hand and knocked twice. Lady Riveria, I brought him with me, she called out, her tone shifting into something a little more formal. Riveria had that effect on people, especially elves.
Come in.
Riveria's voice, calm and elegant as always, carried clearly from the other side. Alicia pushed the doors open, and Judas was greeted with rows upon rows of towering bookshelves. He shifted his gaze forward. There, draped in her elegant robes, Riveria stood behind a desk piled with scrolls and open books, the light outlining her emerald hair like a halo. Her sharp elven eyes lifted from the page, calmly assessing Judas the moment he stepped inside.
Eh? Judas?
A female voice filled with surprise rang in his ears. Turning his head, he spotted Lafia sitting behind another desk, a book in her hands.
It wasn't just her.
The room was full of female elves, all seated at desks cluttered with books and scrolls, while Riveria stood at the center.
Of course, Judas didn't think this was a coincidence.
He was more or less aware of the lineup that made up the Loki Familia's forces. So this is the Fairy Force. A name that Loki insisted on giving them, though it had been outright rejected by Riveria. Still, the members of the group liked it and referred to themselves by it in secret. This was a group composed entirely of elves, with Riveria at the center. The squad consisted of 11 members, all mages or magic swordsmen, who, except for Lafia, had mastered concurrent chanting and trained for high-speed combat, able to skillfully use short chants.
This almost feels like I'm in a classroom, Judas thought, tapping his fingers on his chin. You are finally here. Chapter 116, The Odd One Out.
If one were to ask what woman suited Judas Spade's tastes, the closest answer would probably be someone like Riveria Jo's elf.
Despite being surrounded by undeniable beauties.
Ace, Elise, Kagaya, Ryu, Alfia, and even Belle, none of them ever made his heart skip a beat.
Maybe it was Estalon's influence, maybe it was just him being weird, but his pulse remained perfectly calm.
Not that Riveria made his heart flutter either. But he could at least acknowledge that a woman like her was definitely his type. Mature, composed, elegant, she checked every box. Ryu came in as a close second, serious, disciplined, and quietly elegant. Only in the presence of Elise and the others did she become a flustered mess.
Is it because of Alden? Judas wondered. That guy definitely had a weakness for serious, mature elven women. Looking back at all the anime Alden watched, most of his waifus were either refined older women or female elves. Ugh, why am I thinking about useless things again? Judas shook his head, forcefully shoving away the irrelevant thoughts. His gaze swept the room. Right now, he was very much the center of attention, or more accurately, the subject of curiosity, for a gathering of female elves. The moment he entered, their eyes drifted toward him with subtle, polite interest. If it were Alden in his position, he'd probably be foaming at the mouth in excitement. Arrow elf! Arrow elf! They're everywhere! That voice. Alden's unmistakable inner gremlin echoed in Judas' head, making him sigh internally. Judas, it's nice of you to join us. Come, take a seat. Riveria's calm voice drew him back to reality. She gestured to an empty chair near the front, arranged beside a long table covered with open manuscripts. Judas nodded and stepped forward, Alicia quietly following him with the poise of someone used to the structure of this place. The elven gazes that trailed him were discreet in posture, but not in intensity. If he were the shy type, this would have been torture. Judas pulled out the chair and sat down. Alicia slipped into the seat behind him. Ah! A small gasp came from his right. Judas turned and found Lafia, stiff as a newly carved statue, staring at him with wide, startled eyes. They blinked at each other. Is there a problem? Judas asked, brow raised slightly. He wasn't oblivious. Elves were proud by nature. And having a human sit among them during such a session was bound to stir some thoughts. Probably not hostility, after all, everyone here knew he held first-class combat strength after his duel with Ace. No one would openly complain. But feelings weren't always shown on the surface. There was always that cliché in stories: a newcomer joins a group, and at least one person hates him for no reason, forcing him through a gauntlet of trials to prove himself. Real life wasn't so dramatic, but still, elves were elves. And no, nothing like that, Lafia said hurriedly. I was just surprised, that's all. She muttered quickly before turning back to her book. Or at least, pretending to. Her eyes weren't moving, and the page hadn't turned for a full minute. Judas leaned back in his chair. He didn't know what Lafia thought of him, but he wasn't the type to worry about other people's opinions. Either way, the atmosphere in the room had shifted because of his presence. The elves were watching him. Riveria was evaluating him. Lafia was pretending not to look at him every 3 seconds. And Judas, well, he was acutely aware that he was now sitting inside the heart of the fairy force. Riveria clapped her hands once, producing a sharp sound that immediately drew the room's attention. Right, everyone, listen up. As I mentioned earlier, we will be joined by our newest recruit. Judas Spade. Her gaze swept over the gathered elves before settling on the black-haired boy. Eh? Miss Riveria said something like that? Lafia blurted out, mouth slightly open. Riveria let out a sigh. Well, if you had actually listened and paid attention, you might have known. Her smile was polite, but the strain behind it was obvious. Judging from the lack of surprise on anyone else's face when Judas arrived, Lafia truly was the only one who hadn't gotten the memo. A few giggles bubbled up from the desks, causing Lafia's ears and cheeks to turn bright red. Anyway, Riveria continued. I'm sure everyone here is aware of Judas' prowess as a mage. That is why I brought him here. She folded her hands behind her back. If anyone has objections, you may speak now. A brief silence followed. To Judas' surprise, not a single voice rose. From the beginning, aside from Bet and a handful of skeptical members, most of the Loki familia viewed him favorably. His overwhelming strength certainly played a part, but what truly won them over was his demeanor. Polite, reserved, and humble despite possessing first-class combat ability. To them, Judas was a once-in-a-generation prodigy. A level 2 capable of holding his own against a level 5. What else were they supposed to think? His mere presence boosted the familia's overall combat power. And that was something every member appreciated. The female elves here felt the same, but they also had another layer of interest: curiosity. Instantaneous casting, multicasting, a vast repertoire of spells. What's his secret? How did he train to reach this level? That was the collective thought radiating through the room. Even Lafia was included, which was evident from the way her gaze never left his face. In fact, although they would never admit it, in their minds, Judas was a mage who was already on par with their high elf princess, Riveria. The only aspect he is weak compared to her at the moment was pure firepower. Being able to receive the input and wisdom of such a figure was something they all acknowledged as a huge opportunity. Of course, when it came to a real fight, none of them truly believed Riveria would lose to him. "Alright, since no one has any objections, let's begin," Riveria said, nodding with satisfaction. She paused, her expression softening as she turned toward Judas. "But first, I'd like to thank Judas for accepting my request." Her voice carried genuine respect, something Judas didn't take lightly. He nodded in return and opened his mouth. "No problem. Just ask any questions you have, and I'll answer as best as I can." The moment he said that, the elves collectively leaned forward ever so slightly. From their eager, sharpened gazes alone, Judas could tell these weren't just warriors, they were scholars. Well, not surprising. Judas mused. They're all mages. Curiosity is practically their lifeblood. However, he was well aware that the majority of his knowledge of magic came from Estalon's world. The operations of the two worlds' magic systems are different. Trying to explain his techniques to them might be like trying to describe color to someone who had only ever seen in black and white. It wasn't hopeless, but it would be challenging. This might not turn out as productive as Riveria hoped, Judas thought. But there's no harm in trying. After all, Riveria had asked politely and sincerely. And Judas wasn't the type to refuse someone who approached him with genuine curiosity and respect. There was also the fact that Judas was genuinely curious about how Riveria's lessons usually went. But now came the difficult part. How much should he reveal? How far should he go? Should I teach them about the Manicore method? The thought had been shaking around in his mind ever since the Loki Familia returned. The Manicore method was foundational in Celestia. Efficient, powerful, and transformative. But here? It could change everything. It could reshape Danmachi's magical landscape. Or it could create problems he hadn't foreseen. Well, let's see. Chapter 117, Teaching. If Judas had to pinpoint the biggest flaw of the Falna system, it would be the restrictive rules it imposed on magic. The limitations were clear, especially the 3-slot rule in the magic section. As a result, the diversity of magical spells in the world of Danmachi was surprisingly low, far lower than one might expect in a realm where adventurers routinely faced monsters of unimaginable variety and power. The Falna's limitations inadvertently created a magical landscape where strategic ingenuity was as important as raw magical skill, if not more so. Since mages can't just use every spell they want, they have to carefully choose which 3 to equip and how to use them in combination. Success depends not just on how powerful they are naturally, but how cleverly they use the limited magic they have. In other words, the rules make magic less diverse, but they reward cleverness in how you use what you've got. For example, the whole reason for the formation of the fairy force in the first place, Riveria's skill, Alfregina. Because of this skill, it raises Riveria's magic stat, strengthens the effects of the magic of all elves within her magic circle, and converts the used magic energy of all elves within the magic circle to mind and lets them absorb it again. And the result? It had created an unrivaled squad of powerful mages, the strongest in all of Orario, possessing firepower that even the Freya Familia couldn't match. As for the matter of teaching the Manicore method to others, that's an important decision that will require much deliberation. Judas exhaled slowly, fingers drumming against his thigh as he mulled it over. The Manicore method wasn't some simple breathing exercise or training routine. It was a legacy of a world far different from Orario.
After a long moment, he came to a quiet conclusion.
For now, he would keep it to himself. It hadn't even been that long since he joined the Loki Familia.
They treated him well, true, and he had already formed bonds with some of them, but trust was a different matter altogether. And so, with a small sigh, Judas tucked the thought away. When I'm certain, then I'll decide.
Let's get started. The curious elves then opened their mouths. The questions directed at Judas boiled down to a few key points.
His ability to multicast, his skill in skipping chance, and how he managed to bypass the 3 magic slot limitation.
I don't understand, someone muttered.
The answers he provided left the majority of those present scratching their heads in confusion. Except for Riveria, who seemed to have an inkling of what his words truly meant.
Her, Finn, and Gareth had inquired about Judas' origins from Loki.
And the words that came out of Loki's mouth were definitely shocking. I don't know much, but I do know that he comes from another world. Which would explain why he has such extraordinary abilities despite being low-level. It was only her speculation, pieced together from the small clues Loki had managed to gather so far. But it was enough to make Riveria's heart stir.
Magic from another world, huh?
That was the main reason Riveria had brought him here. Just the possibility of learning magic from a completely different world was enough to ignite her curiosity. Judas Spade, you are full of mysteries.
I want to know more about you.
The thought of asking him to teach her surfaced briefly, tempting her. But she forced it down, not out of pride, but out of respect. Maybe, when he trusts us more, he'll decide to tell us himself. She was determined to make Judas feel a true bond with the Loki Familia. She lowered her eyes, reaching for a particular status sheet. Up to this point, Loki had permitted only Riveria, Finn, and Gareth to view his status sheet.
13,000 magic. Reading the numbers, the green-haired high elf couldn't help but let out a quiet sigh of amazement. The blessing of the world tree, huh?
If my father heard about this, he might just leave the forest he's holed up in and come here without a second thought. She tapped her chin thoughtfully, unaware that the discussion had shifted. The fairy force, initially grilling Judas with questions left and right, now openly shared their own spells and formations, asking for his advice, his perspective, on how to maximize their potential. Judas spoke freely, his words flowing like a torrent, dissecting formations, suggesting refinements, pointing out ways to synchronize their spells with devastating efficiency.
Even Riveria couldn't help but smile faintly, joining in with questions and considerations of her own. Hours passed.
By the time the discussion wound down, a quiet sense of satisfaction settled over the group.
Thank you very much, Judas.
The members of the fairy force said in unison, their expressions glowing with the subtle light of newfound understanding. Although they couldn't get the answers they were seeking, they were able to gain something. Even Lafia had gained a clue on how to achieve concurrent chanting thanks to Judas' words.
A shortcut to learn concurrent chanting, huh? Let me think. Judas thought for a few seconds before answering.
A small trick will suffice, as long as it can help me learn.
Lafia blinked.
Although she had asked that question, she expected him to give the same answer as everyone else who had mastered concurrent chanting. She had practiced really hard, but it seemed like she had a hard time getting the hang of it. The foundation was already there, but she needed one more push to finally be able to pull it off. At this point, she would accept any help, even if she had to swallow her pride and ask for his advice. From what I understood, the process of chanting is like juggling a bunch of bombs in your hands. If you mess up even a little, those bombs will explode, hence ignis fatuus. Concurrent chanting was like that, juggling a bunch of bombs in your hands while moving around. It was a technique that required a lot of skill and control. In my opinion, you should just focus on evading attacks and concentrating on activating your magic, instead of trying to attack and defend at the same time. Judas said this as he remembered Ria's words when he asked her about concurrent chanting.
Lafia, you said you are a rearguard mage, right? Then what do you think is the difference between a rearguard mage and a vanguard mage? Judas focused his gaze on Lafia.
Well, compared to rearguard mages who use large-scale magic that decides the outcome of battles, vanguard mages are those who use small-scale magic.
Lafia answered fluidly without missing a beat.
If she was going to be Riveria's successor, knowing this much should be expected. Then that's the problem, large-scale magic uses way more mind, which in turn is harder to control, and drains your concentration even more. I bet you already have the skill set to do concurrent chanting.
You just need something to click to finally be able to do it.
His words made Lafia fall into silent thought.
Evading and the amount of magic power.
Additionally, you should learn how to split your mind in two. Think of it as allocating resources in your brain so you can learn to multitask effectively.
You asked for a trick, right? Try this exercise. It will probably help increase your focus and concentration. Try chanting while folding laundry.
Or brushing your hair.
Or sweeping the floor. He waved his hand lazily. Even eating works, but that one's a bit tricky unless you want to choke.
If you want a simpler option, try holding up your left and right index fingers, then make a circle with your left and a square with your right.
Judas demonstrated the motion effortlessly, each movement smooth as butter. Lafia went silent, unsure of what she had just heard.
She looked down, watching his hands draw a circle and a square at the same time.
Curiosity tugged at her. It shouldn't be that hard, right? She tried it.
Ha! But to her surprise, she found it far more difficult than she expected.
To practice your ability to evade, try juggling while walking around. Or maybe you could even try juggling in the dungeon while avoiding monster attacks.
And once your mind gets used to that feeling, he continued, you can start weaving simple spells first, then gradually increase the complexity by casting large-scale spells. Before you know it, your brain and body will be used to these actions, and you'll be able to start concurrent chanting without even thinking about it. Lafia stared at him, her breathing slow, almost still. The tricks and exercises he suggested seemed stupid.
But the more she thought about it, this was actually brilliant. Or, more fittingly, stupidly brilliant.
She bowed her head slightly.
Judas, thank you. Truly.
It was on this day that Lafia's impression of him started to change. Judas shrugged like it was nothing.
Hey everyone. We're heading to the hostess of fertility. Don't be late for the feast.
Loki's voice suddenly echoed from the halls as she ran around the mansion like a madman.
For some reason, a wave of familiarity hit Judas, a memory surfaced. Oh, is it that time already?
The event where Bet badmouthed Belle in the bar, causing him to run away crying. It was a particularly memorable scene in the anime, and Judas wondered what would change.
Chapter 118, Troublesome Cats. Judas exhaled softly through his nose. So we've reached that point in the timeline.
He stood up from his seat, dusting off his pants before glancing over his shoulder. Lafia was still looking at him, quiet, contemplative, and strangely appreciative.
She was strangely defensive when it came to Ace. Judas thought.
But now, it seemed he had left quite a positive impression on her. At their first meeting, Lafia had treated him politely, the same as any other new member. However, after he got closer to Ace, whenever she gazed at him, it looked like she was about to spit fire.
A lesbian? Judas scratched his cheek, deadpan. He didn't discriminate based on anyone's preferences.
The anime had already shown a fair share of such unique people, with Loki being the most prominent example.
Didn't Apollo try to go after Belle's ass in season 2?
He eventually shrugged.
Whatever people liked was their business. Right, everyone, you heard our loud goddess. Riveria's calm yet authoritative voice rolled through the room. Let's clean up and prepare to head out. The command instantly mobilized the group. Books were snapped shut, quills tucked away, papers stacked.
Lafia blinked, snapped out of her thoughts, and nodded quickly, picking up the books they had taken out and placing them back on the shelves.
Judas turned his head and saw that Riveria and Alicia had already finished tidying up.
They really do give off the vibes of a mother and an older sister.
After some time, they eventually headed out. Judas followed at a slower pace, hands tucked into his pockets.
The halls of Twilight Manor buzzed with excitement. members shouting, laughing, scrambling to get ready. The whole building felt alive. He stepped out into the courtyard just in time to see Loki riding on Ren's shoulders like a drunken goblin queen, waving a bottle she definitely wasn't supposed to have yet.
We dine. We drink. We cause chaos.
Loki cheered, earning a few chuckles from those who heard her.
Judas! What are you doing by yourself? Walk with us. Tiona's cheerful voice called out. He looked over. The main group of executives had already gathered.
Ace, Tione, Finn, Gareth, the whole lineup.
Right, be with you.
He joined the group, matching their pace as they made their way toward the hostess of fertility. The evening sun draped Orario in warm shades of gold, the streets buzzing as adventurers unwound from the day's dungeon runs.
Lamps flickered to life, illuminating the path to the tavern.
The familiar wooden sign came into view.
The regular customers are here, Naya.
Chloe's voice sang out as she eyed the incoming flood of powerful adventurers.
Heads turned. Whispers rose. The Loki Familia? The Giant Slayers. Look! The Sword Princess. Whoa, this is my first time seeing them up close.
The tavern buzzed with excitement as the Loki Familia entered like celebrities. It was then that Chloe and Anya caught sight of a familiar figure slipping in through the tavern door along with the Loki Familia. A certain black-haired boy stepping through the doorway. Their furry ears twitched. Their eyes cut sideways, in perfect synchronization, toward the kitchen door where Ryu emerged carrying a tray of drinks.
Then back to Judas. Then to each other.
A slow, devilish smile spread across both their faces at the exact same time.
He. The elf slayer, Judas Spade, has made his arrival, Naya. Anya announced loudly, throwing an extra emphasis just to ensure the entire tavern heard. Heads immediately turned. The tavern went dead silent for half a heartbeat, before erupting into excited whispers. Elf slayer? Wait. That rumor is true? Wahaha. You bet your ass that's true. I was there when it happened. What, really? Looking at the elf waitress's reaction, it seems the rumors were true. The legend. The legend is real. Judas froze mid-step as he felt dozens of eyes snap toward him. He wasn't embarrassed. More like mildly annoyed, the same way someone might feel after stepping on a wet floor with socks. Beside him, Loki burst into laughter. But? Elf Slayer? Another title? You're really popular, Judas. Riveria's eyebrow twitched so sharply it was a miracle it didn't slice the air. Lafia turned red on the spot, sputtering silently. Tiona covered her mouth, trying, and failing, not to snicker. Bet let out an aggressive huh? Finn and Gareth had the same reaction, gazing at Judas with surprised eyes as if saying, wow, really? And Rio? Rio stopped mid-stride, the tray still balanced perfectly in her hands. She blinked once, twice, then her expression turned flustered. And her ears? They had turned completely red. Meanwhile, the catgirls continued their theatrics. Everyone, please welcome Naya, the boy who slays elves with nothing but pure charm and danger. Truly a fearsome predator, Naya. Oh, for FCK's sake. Judas snapped, louder than he intended. Half the tavern stopped and stared again. Tiona nearly doubled over laughing. Ace tilted her head, confused as always, as if trying to calculate how exactly he could slay an elf. Just as Chloe and Anya were about to continue, everyone felt magic power being gathered. Judas pointed his finger toward the two catgirls as a magic circle manifested under his feet. Meow. They let out confused squeaks before being encased in a block of ice. Mamma Mia, who would usually kick anyone out for causing trouble in her tavern, only nodded when she saw this. Well, that was deserved. Make sure to let them out quickly, or we'll be short-staffed. She turned around and continued her duties. After a couple of minutes had passed, Judas had finished explaining the situation. What? You actually got to touch Ryotan's breast? Loki's reaction came instantly.
Eyes wide, jaw dropped, and a face full of pure envy. For some reason, she immediately reached out to grope Ryu under the ridiculous pretext of, since Judas got to touch them, I should too. Of course, the goddess of mischief received a tray to the head for her troubles.
Clang! Guh! Ryo didn't even break her calm expression as she delivered the strike. It was clean, efficient, and full of quiet fury.
Meanwhile, Chloe and Anya, freshly thawed from their icy prison,
were now kneeling in front of Judas. Meow, we're sorry, meow.
Their tails drooped like punished kittens. Cheers! A chorus of voices rang throughout the tavern, mugs clinking together loudly.
The atmosphere immediately warmed as the celebration finally went into full swing.
Judas glanced around, watching everyone dig into their meals, chatting, drinking, laughing. The energy was infectious. He couldn't help but smile a little. He swept his gaze around the tavern, searching for a certain white-haired rabbit.
It seems she's not here.
He rubbed his chin thoughtfully. It made sense, since the original timeline had already shifted. It wasn't surprising that some events would change as well. Well, it's not like I'm one of those protagonists who rely on knowledge from the show just to get ahead.
Just as he lifted his spoon to take his first bite. It's been a while, Judas.
Cyr approached him, wearing her signature smile.
For some inexplicable reason, a subtle tension hung in the air. Chapter 119, Crossing Paths with Althea.
Judas turned his head, his purple eyes meeting her soft gray ones.
I guess so.
He replied curtly, neither warm nor cold, just enough to acknowledge her. Ever since the ambush from the Freya Familia happened, Judas had decided to keep his distance from this seemingly ordinary gray-haired waitress. Still, because she was one of Rhea's closest friends, he couldn't exactly ignore her outright. That would cause more trouble than it solved. For some reason, my instincts are telling me to be wary of her. It wasn't paranoia. It wasn't fear. It was instinct. Deep, sharpened intuition. Was it because she seemed connected to the Freya Familia? Possibly. But then why didn't he feel the same about Mamma Mia or Anya? They were also affiliated with Freya, yet his senses registered nothing from them. No danger, no hidden tension. Cyr, however. My gut feeling, it's almost never been wrong. Cyr is definitely connected to Freya in some capacity. Noticing the faint caution in his gaze, Cyr's smile wavered ever so slightly, the edges tightening. Ha ha! Her laugh sounded light, but there was a tiny ripple in it. Like a mask slipping for just a second. Judas, what's with the sudden cold shoulder? Did I do something wrong? Cyr asked with a pitiful expression, her gray eyes widening like a helpless puppy. Judas let out a quiet sigh. It's nothing, Cyr. I'm not angry at you or anything. He replied calmly, taking a small bite of his food. Really? Cyr brightened almost instantly, relief softening her features. She opened her mouth, probably to pester him with more questions. But Mamma Mia's voice boomed across the entire tavern like a war drum. What the hell are you doing slacking off? Get back to work. Her glare alone was strong enough to make any lower-level adventurer piss their pants. Cyr flinched, not from fear, but from reluctance, then released a defeated sigh. I'll see you later, Judas. She said softly before hurrying off, tray in hand. Do you know that girl? Ace, who sat beside him, asked between chews, her voice slightly muffled as she spoke while eating. Just acquaintances. Judas answered before finally focusing on his food. Waha, the person who drinks the most gets to touch Riveria's boobs. Loki's drunken voice entered his ears. Naturally, Judas ignored it and continued eating. The rest of the celebration went on without major incidents. Aside from the awkward interaction with Cyr, there was no drunken rant from Bet making fun of Belle, no commotion, no drama. Everything remained lively, everyone celebrated to their heart's content. By the time the night ended, several Loki Familia members staggered out of the tavern with flushed, drunken faces. Hee 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 la 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 woohoo. Predictably, Loki was the most wasted of them all, babbling nonsense nonstop as Gareth carried her over his shoulder.
Why am I being carried by this hairy old man?
Riveria.
I want Riveria to carry me. Loki whined, flailing her limbs dramatically.
If you want to be knocked unconscious, be my guest. Riveria replied coldly, her glare sharp enough to cut glass. As they made their way back toward Twilight Manor, Judas slowed his steps. His eyes narrowed as he noticed a pair of familiar figures walking down the opposite side of the street. Mother, I don't know what's gotten into you, but I'm not complaining.
It's been a while since we took a walk together. It's nice. A soft, familiar voice drifted through the evening air. It's because this city is too noisy for my liking.
But I suppose it's not bad to do things like this once in a while. There, moving through the warm glow of street lanterns, were Belle and Althea. Oh. Judas realized the situation quickly. They were walking north, Belle and Althea were walking south. They were eventually going to cross paths. And if Judas noticed this, then so did the three Loki executives, and Althea herself. Although the Zeus and Hera Familia had left a permanent mark on Aurario's history, the truth was that most adventurers today had never actually seen a member of those legendary familias in person. At most, they had only heard the stories, tales of impossible strength, unmatched feats, and heroes spoken of like myths. It had been 15 years since their expulsion.
A lot can change in that span of time.
Which was why, for Bet, Tiona, and the others, when Althea stepped into their line of sight, they didn't recognize her at all. But for Finn, Riveria, and Gareth, who were once victims that had suffered constant beatings from members of the Zeus and Hera Familia during their reign, their bodies visibly stiffened. Their expressions froze. As if a ghost from the past had suddenly materialized in front of them. Tiona raised her brow in recognition as she spotted the familiar white-haired girl with red eyes.
Miss Argonaut.
Surprised to see you here at this hour, she said with a friendly smile.
In contrast to that warm exchange, a silent standoff formed between Althea and the Loki trio.
From the very beginning, Althea hadn't even bothered to open her eyes. Even now, despite Finn, Riveria, and Gareth being some of the strongest figures in Aurario, she still treated them like juniors beneath her notice. After giving Judas a brief glance, Althea simply continued walking.
No greetings. No acknowledgement.
Not even to the people she hadn't seen in 15 years.
Wait up.
Belle flinched and hurried after her aunt.
It was nice seeing you all.
Belle added with a polite bow, though her eyes drifted toward Judas more often than anyone else. Just like that, Belle and Althea slipped into the flow of the crowd and vanished from sight.
She's the same as ever.
Gareth muttered with a sigh of relief.
Even now, my thumb's still ringing.
Althea the silence.
Strong and aloof as always. Finn said, shaking his head.
Riveria said nothing, but Judas noticed the subtle tension in her grip around her staff.
So that's Althea from the Hera Familia? Bet asked, a bead of sweat rolling down his temple. Who is that woman?
Why did the captain and the others react like that?
Raoul questioned, confusion written all over his face.
The lower members shared the same baffled look. Despite the unusual encounter, the Loki Familia set the matter aside and headed home.
However, some lingering feelings remained. Althea, one day, will surpass you.
The competitive flame, which they thought had long been burnt out, was set ablaze once more. But what they didn't know was the real reason why Althea had left so abruptly.
Damn it!
Althea cursed internally, pressing a hand against her chest as if that could quiet the rapid hammering of her heart. Her expression remained cold and unreadable, but her ears betrayed her. A faint, unmistakable shade of red was beginning to spread across them. The image of Judas' face from earlier lingered in her mind. Her cheeks heated further.
How infuriating.
He didn't even bother to greet me, his master.
She thought with clenched fist. How completely unacceptable. He has gotten too bold.
Althea muttered under her breath, crossing her arms in a defensive motion Belle had never seen her make before.
Mother? Are you blushing?
Even the narrator didn't know where Belle suddenly gained the courage to ask that question.
But what was certain was that Belle snapped her mouth shut the moment Althea's icy glare turned toward her.
Had the Loki trio seen her expression right now, their jaws would have dropped to the floor. A few hours later. Back at the Twilight Manor, Judas, on his way to his room, crossed paths with Finn in the hallway.
I've already sent a letter to the Freya Familia's folkvanger,
Finn said with a small smile as he walked past, giving Judas a firm pat on the shoulder.
You'd better bring your A game. Tomorrow's going to be a big day. With that, he continued down the corridor.
Judas exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the night settle onto his shoulders.
Chapter 120, The Assassination Order.
In the underworld, a new assassination order had surfaced, quietly at first, like a ripple beneath black, stagnant water. But that ripple grew. Whispers slithered through back alleys, smoke-filled dens, and the shadowed corners where killers gathered.
A contract like this did not appear every day. Kill Judas Spade.
The name alone froze conversations.
A high-profile, high-value target. The rising star of the Loki Familia.
A man whose very existence had begun to quietly tilt the balance of power in Orario. The reward posted for his head?
Enough to make even veteran assassins pause mid-breath.
It had been a long time since someone dared issue a hit on anyone connected to the Loki Familia, much less someone so blaringly in the spotlight in recent times.
Naturally, the smart ones tried to trace the order's source. They expected a rival Familia. A power-hungry noble faction. Maybe even a secret evil organization.
But when they discovered the truth, many could only snicker in disbelief. The order came from a pampered noble's son who had recently become an adventurer, or more like, was trying to act like one, an amateur with more coin than common sense.
And his stated reason?
How dare he lay his hands on my rose? A petty, childish jealousy.
A tantrum dressed as a death order.
But assassins did not care about such reasons. They only cared about the payout, the risk level of the mission, and whether they believed themselves capable of eliminating the target. Naturally, most assassins ignored the order entirely. Not just because the target belonged to a top-level familia, but also because Judas himself was a formidable foe. However, there were always those with balls of steel, the overconfident, the reckless, or simply the ignorant, who actually accepted the mission. One look at the reward was enough to tempt them. Hee, with this much money, I could lay around for the rest of my life and still have millions to burn.
A beastkin assassin licked his lips.
His name was Reddit, and he had just returned to Orario after escorting a noble.
Only a level 2? This is going to be easy. The only problem is that he's from the Loki Familia. Judas' fame had already spread throughout Orario.
But that wasn't the case for those outside the city.
Why?
There were several reasons. First, the Donatus had not yet been held, and second, Judas Spade was still a new name. There simply hadn't been enough time for word of his feats to spread beyond Orario's walls.
Because of that, Reddit remained completely ignorant of Judas' true capabilities.
Of course, he had eventually come to hear a few rumors about the target during his investigation.
But that only made him scoff in disdain. Fastest rank up in history, 4 days? Once-in-a-generation prodigy? And the most laughable claim of all.
A level 2 with the combat prowess of a first-class adventurer.
Reddit nearly laughed himself off the roof.
What kind of idiots believe this garbage? The Loki Familia must be inflating the stories to hype their prestige. To him, it was obvious, the Loki Familia was creating rumors to hype their new golden boy.
Judas Spade was overrated. Judas Spade was lucky. Judas Spade was just some slightly talented rookie with a big familia covering his back.
His grin twisted into something darker. It wasn't just him, there were plenty of people who doubted the validity of the rumors surrounding Judas.
Not only were the claims absurd, they outright defied common sense. People believed what they wanted to believe.
They will see the believable lie as the more likely fact than the ridiculous truth. And Reddit wanted to believe he was about to make the easiest fortune of his life. Even if such rumors were backed by the guild, he dismissed them with ease. He's probably some brat with a bit of skill, Reddit muttered, baring his sharp teeth. I'll carve him open and expose this fraud to the world. As for the Loki Familia, if I can leave this city fast enough, they won't be able to track me down. After all, he was an assassin, a profession where danger was woven into every step. His muscles coiled, his fingers brushing the knives hidden beneath his cloak. Reddit, level 3 assassin, declared silently, murderously, as killing intent rolled off him like a toxic fog. I'll turn him into a corpse. Confident. Ignorant. And already dead, he just didn't know it yet. Reddit, now dressed in his assassin's attire, was shrouded in a thin veil of dark fog. It was his stealth magic. Unless someone with specialized sensory magic was actively searching for him, he was confident no one would notice his presence. There are quite a few guards, but it's not a big deal. He had already infiltrated the Twilight Manor, perched atop a high tree branch that offered a perfect view of his target. His eyes narrowed as he spotted Judas stepping into his room and turning off a lamp. So relaxed. So casual. So utterly unaware. Hee, look at this guy. He has no idea he's about to die. Reddit grinned, his eyes curling into crescent slits as he imagined the fortune waiting for him. He tightened his grip, dagger in one hand, a poison-laced throwing knife in the other. Just as he was about to move. Wow, so it was true. An assassin really made it in. You are the fourth one, I think. A little tricky to find. Must be some kind of concealment magic, but, well, it doesn't matter. A feminine voice spoke inches away from where he crouched. With skin as brown as wheat and a massive weapon slung casually over her shoulder, Tiona, wielding her greatsword Urga, blinked at him in mild curiosity. The Crusher? Reddit's eyes widened. He jerked his head toward her and sprung backward in a panic. He hurled the poison knife, but Tiona blocked it with a lazy flick of her wrist. Ho, at least level 3. She murmured, unimpressed. Seeing his attack neutralized so effortlessly, the assassin's heart dropped. Shit. I've been caught. Sweat streamed down his face. He spun around and immediately fled, abandoning the mission without hesitation. Forget the mission, my life comes first. He risked a glance behind him. No one was chasing. He exhaled in relief, though he kept running. He sprinted toward the outer wall, bent his knees, and just as he was about to leap. Where do you think you're going? A boot smashed into his face, sending him crashing into the ground. Arg! Groaning, Reddit lifted his head. His voice trembled. Al, chat. Anna Kitty, the black-haired catwoman, landed gracefully beside him, cold eyes gleaming with disdain. Another fool bold enough to step into these grounds, she said, her voice sharp as a blade. Those were the last words he heard before darkness swallowed him. Inside the manor, Judas, having watched the entire thing through his open window, took a sip of water, raising one finger as a magic circle hovered above it. It was a spell that revealed the assassin's location, though there was no way Reddit would know that. Needs ice. He muttered, turning away without another thought. By tomorrow, he'd forget this ever happened. Or rather, the truth was simpler. He had never considered the assassin a threat to begin with. In Finn's office, Finn, Riveria, Gareth, Bet, and a few other members were gathered, reviewing intel. We've tracked down the source. It seems to be a noble from Rakia. They were still in the middle of discussing when a knock sounded on the door. Come in, Finn said, glancing up. Captain, we caught another one. Tiona stepped inside, dragging an unconscious body across the floor before tossing it into the center of the room. Good job. Finn nodded, not even bothering to look at the man. His gaze shifted to Bet. Bet, go shut down the assassination order. Use force if needed. At that, Bet smirked, letting out a low, satisfied grunt. Now you're speaking my language, Captain. He turned on his heel and left. It seems the prestige of our familia has taken a hit if these people think they can target one of our own and walk away without consequences. Only then did Finn spare a brief glance toward the bodies on the floor. Tioni, Narvi, Cruz, head to Rakia and deliver a warning. If they persist, tell them the Loki familia will become their enemy. Yes, Captain. They saluted sharply. Gareth and Riveria stayed quiet. They didn't protest, after all. When they heard an assassination order had been placed on one of their members, it would be a lie to say they weren't furious. As the others departed, Finn finally allowed a small smile to curve at the corner of his lips, one eye closing in that familiar, confident expression. I think it's time to remind these people who we are. That wraps up this part of What If a Venerated Soul Reincarnated in Danmachi World. Thanks so much for listening. As always, new parts drop every 4 days, so be sure to stay tuned. Also check out my Patreon channel for early releases of all the series, where you can find all the series released one day ahead of YouTube. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, share it with your friends, and please consider supporting the original author as well. See you in the next one.